What's going on, guys? It's your boy Beats by Ash, back at it again with another banger of a video, and today we just witnessed the release of Wilds of Eldraine Alchemy on MTG Arena, which, if you don't know what alchemy is, there's nothing wrong with you. Alchemy is a really weird thing that Wizards doesn't really do a good job of announcing, and if you weren't watching the Arena Championship this weekend, which is really just an oblivious event, then you would have no idea that this was actually coming out. But essentially what it is Arena's version of Hearthstone-esque cards, where all of the cards that are a part of this mini set are essentially subject to change so that they can implement different balances and supposedly keep the format fresh. And it's supposed to encourage more quick gameplay and essentially like more random effects that normally would not be possible in paper Magic. And with this release, we are going to be going over the introduction of these new cards with the implication of Wilds of Eldraine Alchemy Draft. And today here I have my co-host, Tulsa Clout Noah.
Hey yo, what's going on? I'm here to see these new alchemy cards, and hopefully alchemy gets into a state where it finds its identity. But the new cards, there are a couple that are pretty exciting, though. So fun to think about what could be.
So I do want to just go ahead and start off with going over a little bit of our experiences with alchemy cards in the past. I know we both have really enjoyed the Wilds of Eldraine draft set so far, and I'm excited to see if this is something that is worth experiencing with you guys. And that's kind of why I wanted to talk about it today, because even though it just came out, I haven't really seen anyone be interested in this topic, or, at least discussing, if it's worth it to do this new kind of draft if you already enjoy the regular Wilds of Eldraine. So I'm going to go ahead and start off and talk about previously my only experience with alchemy cards in draft. I think it was in the set that came out with the Power Stone and the Might Stone.
Yeah, the Dominaria.
Yeah, so in Dominaria, I kind of clicked on that game mode just to kind of see what it was about, because, I've taken different breaks at certain points in Arena's history, and when I came back, that one was like the newest draft experience, and so I just kind of got into it that way. And that's where they, started introducing like the spellbook mechanic and the seek. And honestly, my experience was with those cards and alchemy cards in general is that it kind of just creates more randomness. And when you're going through essentially paid drafts that require, a currency you essentially have to spend money on unless, you're grinding several hours a day, that's kind of something that I'm not very interested in, and I didn't find it as fun. I think I would have found more enjoyment in it if it was some kind of phantom draft, but for the most part, it just kind of felt like to me that these cards really just made it to where, you're investing, a portion of money that you want to either get better at limited, or you just want to enjoy it overall, and it takes away a little bit of that competitiveness, at least for me in my experience, because, someone just gets to add a card off of a spell book that's really powerful, and they really had no agency in determining what that was, but it just kind of allowed them to create a snowball effect that allowed them to win the game.
Yeah, it's just like, it is literal RNG, right? Like, I remember when that Angel draft card came, and that was just like one of the most, I think it was like a free event, that you would just play, and it was just like the most polarizing card. Like if you drew it, you just won the game instantly. Like that was when alchemy like first was, getting its foothold in.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like in a set where Wilds of Eldraine, I would consider there to be less bombs than some of the other sets that have happened. In Dominaria, of course, there were several bombs, but a lot of the experiences I had with the alchemy cards, like you just said, not even necessarily unfair, but it didn't feel rewarding whenever I utilized one of those or when my opponent did. And obviously part of that is that, there's going to be only one alchemy card in each pack, and it's just like when the person gets a random effect that spirals out of control and allows them to win the game, it's hard for me to feel like I could have done anything differently to control that aspect of the game. And that's something for me that I just personally do not like, but I don't know what your take is on that.
Yeah, because and especially with like the uncommon range of the alchemy cards, they just vary. Like the cards that you can actually get it from their spell book just vary too widely in quality. Like the one I talked about, Celestial Vault, the Angel one. Well, when it's actually like in since the format has gotten a bigger card pool, like you actually can play around. Like all the cards do a similar thing. Yeah, they can get a 1-drop or a 5-drop, but you know what it's going to be doing. Whereas the uncommon ones, it's literally like you're flipping a coin. It's like the coin flip cards.
Yeah, for sure. Especially there was that one blue flying guy that put the power 9 into your deck or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not very fun when my opponent just gets, an Ancestral Recall, or is it Ancestral Knowledge?
Yeah, no, it's Ancestral Recall. I just was able to do that with Snapcaster when I was doing like the cube thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's just incredibly busted. It doesn't feel rewarding. But in general, I feel like we both have kind of had like a negative experience with these alchemy cards. Just to say that I don't think it makes the format necessarily more fun. In the previous sets, they've tried to implement it. So I'm excited to see if they can actually get set off on, the right foot this time and not just blow everything out of the water with these polarizing potential bombs that take away a lot of the skill expression.
Mm-hmm. And I also would want to say the one good thing about Alchemy is where the cards feel the best in right now is Historic Brawl. But of course, there's no support for Historic Brawl. There's no way to obviously we're not getting multiplayer, so that's a huge huge burden as well with just like you kind of have to like manage the power level of your own deck. Commander and Brawl subsequently is like still like a pretty social game. Obviously you can't get that social on Magic Arena, but I usually play Brawl challenging you or other friends on here, and so will say Alchemy cards do feel good playing in Historic Brawl.
Oh, for sure. So we've got a total of, I believe, 27 alchemy cards to discuss here. What color do you want to start off with?
Yeah, we can just go down the list. Let's go white first.
Okay. So starting off with white, we have Dedicated Dollmaker. 1 in a white for a 2/2 creature. When Dedicated Dollmaker enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target non-land, non-token permanent. Its controller creates a token that is a copy, except it is not legendary and it is an artifact in addition to other types. With an additional ability that is 1 in a white, tokens you control gain indestructible until the end of the turn. Activate only once. So essentially, I guess the premise of this is if you're playing like a white strategy that has a lot of ETBs, you can, almost do like a Yorion effect.
Yeah, classic flicker card.
Yeah, and then if you want to protect it later, you can also get that advantage. I don't know that there's too much utility to targeting your opponent's creatures to give them a token. I mean,
if you have a bounce spell, that would actually be one where you'd want to, create a token and then bounce it.
Sure. So, I mean, maybe if you're white-blue, which is currently the lowest win rate color pair, you can do like a Johann Stopgap or a Balloonist Gatekeeper. So you get rewarded for just being in a bad place. And, on top of that, it's in the rare slot.
Yeah, I will say usually these white cards that protect have, it makes them sacrifice. So I will say like Dedicated Dollmaker, paying 2 mana to make it indestructible, that is, that is a little mana intensive, but I would say having a heroic protection, on standby for 1 creature is pretty good.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting card. In my opinion, I think this is kind of a card where if you're already in this color pair, and let's say you're late into pack 2, maybe pick 3, pick 4, and you already kind of want this strategy, or even, pack 3, it's kind of something you would take along the way. But I don't know if this really justifies a build around, seeing that it's kind of like doing nothing at the beginning of the game, because 2 drops you want to play on turn 2, and if you're playing this on turn 2, most likely it's just a vanilla. And for that reason, it's something that I'm not really looking to highly prioritize.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. This is like a pack 2, pack 3 card, and it's an amazing. If you know you're in that usually Bant style white green X color, um, it's like splashing white, with like alkalite and whatnot, and then having the fixing. I definitely can see Dollmaker making just a really nice slot in on those kind of decks, but that's like the one archetype. I can't really think of anything else.
But let's go ahead and move on to the next one here, and this one is actually quite a bit better. It is Porcine Portent, I believe I'm saying that right. 3 and a white, and when Porcine Portent ETBs, conjure a card of your choice from the 3 Pigs spellbook onto the battlefield, and as well, boars you control get +1/+1. And that's an enchantment, and then it has an adventure for 2 and a black, instant, exile target creature. You gain 1 life for each boar you control. And in the 3 Pig spellbook, you've got the first pig, which is 1 and a Silencia of your choice to make a 2/2, where you can pay 1 and a Silencia again to exile an artifact or enchantment, activate only once. So, second little pig, 1 and an Orzhov for a 2/2. You can pay 2 and 2 Orzhov, and this creature perpetually becomes a spirit with base power and toughness 4/4 and flying. Only activate if this is already not a spirit, so essentially you activate just once. Then the third little pig is 1 in a Golgari with a 2/2 stat line. Whenever you conjure 1 or more other cards, this perpetually gets +1/+1. And this also triggers if this is in your graveyard. Oh, and I forgot to mention the second little pig is actually a 2/3. So it's probably the one that if you're going to put one on the battlefield, you're probably putting the second little pig on the battlefield just because it has a better stat line. But in general, this card is very, very broken. In the sense that...
Broken, it's powerful though. It's definitely probably one of the most powerful ones.
Well, the reason why I say it's kind of broken is not because if my opponent has it, I feel like they're sacking me, but because it kind of just invalidates certain other cards in the set in the form of, key rares such as the End, which is 4 mana to exile something and requires 2 black. And then you've got that other 4 mana black spell, which exiles a creature, and if you control an enchantment, you get to scry 2. There's also the Shatter the Oath, which is a 5 mana black card that allows you to just destroy something, and then you get to create a Wicked roll. And essentially, my point is, you would just play this for the instant side, which is 3 mana to be able to exile a creature with potential upside, and then later on, you're going to get 2 more cards. So in general, this is just kind of a better version of other cards that were already premium removal to start with. So, I mean, nothing too crazy, but it does just kind of invalidate other key picks. Like, if I have one of those cards, and then you also have this card, it just makes your card seem like it's so much better than mine, right?
It definitely is a resource creep, like, a value creep, draw creep, whatever you want to call it. They are going in the direction with these alchemy cards of just kind of being these like value engines in themselves, But I will say I do love how the spellbook is 3 cards. That is, what I would preferably have, where like, you're guaranteed to, choose one, and you can somewhat play around that a lot more than say, a 15 card spellbook.
Some of these spellbooks have so many different cards that as a person who is trying to get familiar with this set, if you joined in the alchemy portion of the set, I already need to get to know all of the other cards that are in the base set, and now you're just making me learn about like 10 different tokens, essentially, are so niche. And with this, it really simplifies that. So I guess I'll give it to Watsy on this one, that it is more simple than, other copies in the past. But in general, I mean, it's just a strong card. You're probably going to play this if you're black and you don't need to have the white side. If you can also access the white side with the premium fixing in the set, you're probably going to be able to play the white more than not. But at the end of the day, this is a very versatile card, and you're probably going to be able to pick this up at any point in the draft, and I would feel pretty comfortable with just first picking this. Next, we've got Cerise, Slayer of Fear, 3 and 2 white for a 5/5 first strike lifelink. at the beginning of your post-combat main, if you gained life this turn, seek a card with the highest mana value among cards in your library with mana value less than or equal to the amount of life you gained this turn. So, first off, I'm going to say, this is one of the most poorly worded cards I have seen in a long time. They found a way to make this card so convoluted for what you're actually doing. So essentially, if you attack with this and you hit for 5 and you gain 5, then you're going to be able to seek for a card that is 5 or less, essentially, but it's going to be the highest card in your deck. So if you have a 5-cost creature, that's what you're going to get off of this. I mean, in general, 5 mana for a 5/5 first strike lifelink is already enough justification to put this card in your deck. I mean, it's just a walking stat stick with the potential to create an infinite value engine. So, I mean, I would definitely first pick this. White is already, like, not the worst. And, if you have a good white start, I think this card is, beyond amazing, but also not too pushed because the removal in this set is pretty premium, and we have some other alchemy cards that also allow you to answer this. So, I mean, it kind of just increases the power level of this set, but overall, I think it's a fair design.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of this card, especially because, like, whenever I draft, like, the white-blue, colorless, spells cost X less, I usually end up playing them just because it's a good stat line, but it just, I want more lifelink stuff or, actual valid, playable life gain stuff to actually make use of that. And this is something that definitely at least lets me play in that fantasy a little. And even if it might not be like the best thing possible, if you just happen to get that little combo going, it's always nice to see.
For sure. Now we're going to move on to, I believe, the last white card here, Stormkeld Curator, 4 colorless and 2 white for a 6/6. ETB, you may put any number of aura cards from your graveyard and or hand onto the battlefield attached to it. And then we have the adventure for X blue, conjure X random cards from the spellbook to your hand. And this one is not so simple. This one literally has 13 different cards you can add off of the spellbook. We're not going to go over all of these, but I mean, it's some pretty medium enchantments throughout the course of the game's history. We've got stuff like Curiosity.
I will say these cards like really vary in quality because like you have On Sarah's Wings, which is like really starting to go lower power level, and then like a Celestial Mantle, which is just like, why is this in here?
Yeah, for sure. I think this is a little bit too gimmicky for me. Like, I could see you pulling this off. One thing I will say is that when I first looked at this, I didn't realize you could attach from the graveyard, but that makes it a little bit better. But in general, I don't think that's enough justification to actually, make this like a high value playable. I think if you get past it late and your deck like already has a bunch of synergies, it's okay. But in general, I haven't been a big fan of cards in this set where you have to have A in order to do B. And you can argue that the adventure kind of gets around that. But in general, if you're playing white, you don't want to be playing blue. And so I just don't really see a space for this unless you're already like going that gimmicky route. I think it's more of a for fun card, honestly.
And honestly, the thing that's hurting it is like it's both double pipped mana. Like, if the curator was like maybe 1 white instead of double white, I think the giant secret should stay double blue. Like maybe that would, I think that'd make the card much better. But like everything you just said, plus it's 2 double pips.
So now we're going to move on to the first blue card here, Tome of Gadwick, 1 blue for an artifact equipment. When equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you can conjure a random card from the spellbook to your hand, and it has an equip cost of 1. Now, this one is one that, in all honesty, I'm not really a fan of because we've seen that Curiosity has been relatively lackluster in the meta. It's actually one of the lowest win rate cards on 17 lands, and realistically, the best place for Curiosity has been in those gimmicky red-blue decks where you're playing multiple copies of the Catapult, which is already, kind of a slow card. And what really ruins this card is that with Curiosity, you're paying a mana to potentially draw a card, right? Well, with this one, you need to pay essentially 2 mana to draw a card that costs you mana to draw more cards. And for me, that's just way too hefty of a cost in a format where Curiosity is already hard to get off.
I will say, I think the only place this card has for is fairies. I do believe that this is like if you can hit that high number of flying count. Like because like preordain and ponder are no joke. Like those are extremely good cantrips. Of course, you're not guaranteed it. It's conjure random, so you could just get something like sleight of hand or peak, which peak's still good. But yeah, quicken, like that's just like draw a card. Same with obsessive search. So like varies wildly in quality, which is what I don't like about spell books. I kind of wish I want all the cards to be like the same power level, just hitting different areas. Like kind of like a toolbox. So, but I think this is only playable in fairies. But if you have like fairies lined up, you high rolled, like you're eating.
Yeah, because in my experience, when I played Blue-Black Fairies, which is actually currently the highest win rate deck among top players on 17 lands, you don't really need more cards that draw you a card because your win condition is to utilize cards such as like Into the Fey Court and recycling those. And, I guess the one thing this card does have for it is an equipment. The place I see this being is that in those decks where you would be playing like a sleight of hand, it realistically just replaces that sleight of hand slot because I guess if you play it on turn 1, it's essentially free. And then from that point on, you can just keep equipping and keep trying to like extract value, which in my opinion doesn't really solve a problem that blue has in the meta. But I mean, it could be fun, if it works out, like you said, kind of a win more card, but it is what it is. Moving on, we've got Paths of Tuinvale, 1 in a blue for an instant. Choose one or both. Return a creature you control to the owner's hand, and then that spell costs 1 less perpetually. Or return target creature you don't control to the owner's hand, and that spell costs 1 more perpetually. I think this is a very interesting card. I mean, obviously, if you're able to get off both halves, it really pays for itself. It's kind of a card where, like, blue in general has this issue where all the cards in the 2-drop and below slot that are good are at uncommon or higher. And the fact this is also uncommon is just one of those things where it's like, yeah, I mean, it is a good card for blue, but we need more of these good cards at common. So it just adds another one of those good uncommons, which pretty much most of the blue cards that are good are already uncommon. So it's kind of just in like a clogged slot in the deck, but I could easily see you playing one of these.
This is something that I would say requires green. Like this is something that is just, classic green, ban, or throw red in. But I think like if you are behind on board, they attack. It's like, okay, I block here and then tap, cancel 2 attacks out. I think that's really well. It also can save a creature, stop your opponent from doing something, bounce ETBs. And I do agree with you. Yeah, I wish it was not uncommon because, like, adding to the stack. But I would say this card is really strong. Like, if you can play it, like, if you can get that mana working, I would run it.
Yeah, I think it really does depend on what color pair you get to pair it with because for me, a lot of this is about, how many creatures is my deck going to have. And in some of the better, like, blue-black decks I've had, I tend to have potentially, like, 8 or 9 creatures. So obviously, yeah, like, if you're playing a red or a green deck, I'd probably feel like I'm getting more value out of this card. But, I mean, it's a decent card in any deck. I just think it's better in certain color pairs than others. Next, we've got a really good card for blue, Talion's Throne Guard. One thing you need to know about this set is if there's a card with Talion in its name, it's probably a good card. 2 and 2 blue for a 2/1 Flash Bargain Flying. ETB, return 1 target spell or non-land permanent to the owner's hand. And if this was bargained, that card perpetually gains. This spell costs 2 more. Yeah, so this is kind of like a blue Elite Spellbinder, which, we saw in draft that Elite Spellbinder was an amazing card. And this kind of just adds on to that in a set where Bargain is pretty much an upside at this point. And this is exactly what you want to be doing, because what I found is something I've learned recently from playing blue more is that a lot of the blue decks I play, I actually want to be going second in game one, just because a lot of your good cards are going to be better reactively than they are proactively, and this fits really well into that role. What I will say is this card is in a slot that's, somewhat contested, because a lot of the good reasons to be in blue are because certain cards end up going very late, and one of those cards happens to be Johan's Stopgap. And, if you're playing this, you're probably going to be playing one less Johann Stopgap, which, that can kind of hurt sometimes. But overall, I think this is an amazing card. I love the way that it's designed, and I think that this is right up the alley of what the intentions are of blue in this set. And that intention is that the people who put more time into this set are going to have a higher win rate with blue, because they're more skill-intensive cards. And if you can fully utilize everything this card has to offer, then this is an A+ card. But for a person who doesn't draft very often, it's not going to feel as powerful as it would for a top player.
Yeah, and another thing I want to touch on is they could have printed this in the main set, and it would have just, it would have slipped right in, of course, if it didn't have that alchemy mechanic, right? But it just feels so natural. And then also, I just want to make sure, this is a counter spell. Like, it can target a spell or non-land permanent. We only really see cards like Unsubstantiate. Like, it's usually you either get to return the spell or you get to return a permanent. We've never really gotten cards that let us do both. So I like how this is, it is power creeping, but this is the kind of power creep that I want to see. It's like pushing the game, further in, and really expanding like the design space.
For sure, and it's a fairy. I've got a love for fairies in general. I'd love to make a standard fairy deck. And one last thing I'll say about this card is I think this is one of the few cards we've seen so far where I could potentially see this going into a standard alchemy deck. Now, not a lot of people actually play constructed alchemy, but I see this card being, power creep enough to where, maybe you do put this into a control band deck, or maybe even Fairies Tribal, which, I think that's a good tier 2 deck in normal standard. I don't know how good that is in alchemy with the higher power level, but I think this fits into a lot of those constructed decks. And now our last blue spell card, you would say, is the Conundrum with Bowls. 2 and 2 blue. Chapter 1, seek a card with mana value less than the number of cards in your hand. Chapter 2, seek a card with mana value greater than the number of cards in your hand. And Chapter 3, count the number of cards in your hand. You may cast a spell with mana value equal to the number of cards in your hand without paying its mana cost. Now, my first impression with this card is extremely convoluted. I think there could have been, a better way to structure this card. But in general, I just feel like this card, it's requiring you to do too many things to get the most value out of it. This is almost like having a companion in a draft deck, because now I don't really want to pick this up in the beginning, because it's just asking a lot about what cards I need to construct for it to be like a B+ A level card. Whereas in the late stages, if I wasn't focusing on trying to get around this, I don't know how often I'll even put this in my deck. I would compare this similarly to the Apprentice's Folly, which is the 2 and a red and a blue, which makes the tokens, and then on the third chapter, the tokens get removed. It's just like a very weird card where if you happen to be in the position where your deck works really well with this card, it could be a B+ A card, but generally speaking, I don't think most decks will fall into that category because it's double blue.
And 4 mana. This card is so expensive.
Yeah. If you're at 4 mana, you're going to be able to get to a value engine like an Into the Fake War more likely. If you can take a turn off when you have 4 mana, it's probably not turn 4. So at that point, you're probably just going to be able to play one of your common blue spells that generates value. It's just asking so many things to do what you're doing in blue. And on top of that, the double blue is just something that hurts it for me, because what I've noticed with blue is you need to have a reason to be in blue in the first place, because like I touched on before, most of the good blue cards, most of the reasons I want to be in that archetype are cards that are uncommon or higher. And so I want to see a rare blue card that I can pick up at the beginning of the draft that incentivizes me to be in that color. And this card does not incentivize you to do that at the beginning of the draft.
This card requires you, I think, to have like the Fey draw 3 card. Like you have to already have that before you pick this card. And yeah, that's that's the kind of conundrum. Like you're picking the combo piece before really finding the combo.
I mean, it's generally speaking just a win more card. I think there's nothing else to really say about this. And we've got a blue land here, Loch Laranet, ETB tapped, and then add 1 for a blue, or you can pay 1 in a blue and tap to scry 3. Target opponent gets a one-time boom. When you create a creature spell, that creature enters the battlefield tapped and with a stun counter on it. Activate only during your turn and only once. Now, I'm going to let you talk about this for a second because I just got extremely confused.
Okay, yeah. Enter this battlefield tapped. It makes sense. This is, an uncommon level card. So that's obviously hurts, but I do think, like, scry 3 for... you're paying 3 mana to scry 3. Remember Castle Vantress, which was 4 mana... I think it was 3 mana or 4 mana to scry 2. So this is kind of like a power crept Castle Vantress, except it doesn't enter tap. So, it is a little balanced, I would say, But I think this is extremely good. Stun counters are annoying. Like, I have, had drafts where, like, the stun counter, like, putting multiple stun counters on a creature really does hurt. So I never see the opportunity to go blue because, again, everything is uncommon that you need. So, of course, this is just another uncommon pool to, the only really way you can play blue is to, collect enough of these uncommons.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it just seems kind of broken if you're already in blue, but it's not a reason to be in blue, right? But right, it also just seems like a card that, like we've seen with the good actual lands that animate themselves, like Restless Vinestalk. A lot of the times, I just put that in my deck, even if I don't really have a reason to like play any green cards or blue, whatever color I pair them in, just so that I can potentially animate it later on, because those effects have been extremely powerful. And if you're already in blue, this is just a free effect. And potentially, if you have a way to make another blue mana source, like I would say most likely if you're in green, like let's say, for example, you're green-red, you probably just pick this up because you could make a treasure. Definitely. You can make a treasure, or you could filter your mana, and then you just have a free scry 3, which is just really broken. Like, I don't even care about the boon. Like, the boon...
Yeah, the boon is just even more than nice. Like, damn. But you only can activate it once. It is a one-time use, though.
And it's only during your turn, but who really cares? Like...
Yeah, this is, like, great for those grind games. Like, sometimes you will have those, like, it is a fast format, but sometimes, like, the way your decks interact, it really is just, like, a back and forth, like, slugfest. And this is, like, an excellent slugfest. Card selection, I always value card selection really highly in drafts, especially when there's a lot of, like, uncommons that might as well be bombs in this set. So just being able to find those consistently, I would love.
Yeah, I think this is one of the cards in Alchemy in general that if you're doing an Alchemy draft, you're probably more often than not going to pick this up compared to some of the other cards where it's like, you need to be in a specific lane. This card is just strictly good.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of this card. And I think in Standard, I definitely can see it being ran in, I don't know if Control is going to be good or not. A set just came out, but I definitely can see it be played as a 1 or 2 of.
Yeah, I mean, we did see the nerfs to Bowmaster, but there was a guy who I think the second place guy, he was playing Dimir Control, and even with the nerfs to Bowmaster, I still think in Dimir Control this is a solid card. You probably at least play 1, and it's also not legendary. That's important to note for Constructed. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our first black card here, and a quite busted one at that. Dunbarrow Revitalist, 1 and a black for a 3/1 creature with Bargain. ETB, you get a one-time boon when one or more creatures ETB under your control create a Wicked Roll token attached to one of them. Then, if this was bargained, you can return a creature from your graveyard to your hands. I mean, there's not much to say here. This card is just extremely pushed. I mean, you don't even have to get the bargain effect off. Just having a 3/1 stat line that gives you immediate value is something there to be said, because as we've seen in this format, 1 toughness creatures are very susceptible to being punished. The only 1 toughness creatures that are really worth playing are the ones that give you immediate value on play, and this guarantees you immediate value with an additional potential upside beyond that.
And can we talk about how, the thing that can stop you from like really going hard on a bargain strategy and draft is just like, the bargain and the, creating the bargain targets and then having the bargain payoffs. This is both something that can bargain and then also makes a token that you can bargain away, which I'm a big, obviously a big fan of. So it really helps those bargain strategies just be even more consistent. Yeah, this card is just super pushed.
I mean, what if I told you that this was 2 mana for a 4/2, whenever it leaves the battlefield, you deal 1 damage to the other guy? You'd play this every time. Like, I mean, that's basically what it is, potentially getting to do something else.
Right, yeah. Really pushed. Definitely first pickable if, like, your rare's bunk.
Yeah, for sure. That card broke. Thank you. Black was already, the second most played color, if not the best color to start in. All right, now we're going to take a look at Underbridge Warlock. 3 and double black for a 5/4 creature, Death Touch. ETB, you get a one-time boon at the beginning of your end step. If 3 or more creatures died, each opponent loses 5 life. You gain 5 life. At the beginning of your end step, if you have a boon, mill 3, draw a card, lose 2 life. Now, on paper, I think from the outside, if you have no information about this format, this card seems really good. And honestly, I would put this card into a category similar to the Tortoise, which is the 4 mana 3/3 that on attack and ETB you mill. And I like what this card does. My issues with it are that you're in a 40 card deck, and when you mill yourself, you can quite quickly deck yourself out. And if you're not able to make 3 or more creatures die in a turn, then you're always going to be self-milling yourself. 3 cards is a pretty big downside, and losing 2 life is also a big downside because, we're playing this turn 5 and onward, so our health total is already going to be touched up, and having 4 toughness isn't the best stat line to have for being Death Touch. On top of that, there's somewhat a lack of sweepers in this format. Like, realistically, if you slap this on the board, your opponent is probably going to do everything they can to not let 3 or more creatures die in a turn. And that's already kind of hard to do when they aren't going against that strategy. So overall, I don't know how I feel about this card. I think it's probably C+. I mean, it's decent.
Yeah, so the thing is, the only way to get creatures to die like that is attacking and then bargaining off. I will say that having that boon, especially if it would put their opponent in lethal, it could lead into situations where they let you get away with attacks because you're threatening that if they block something, you're able to kill 2. So I will say that I wouldn't rate it as harshly. Losing 2 life is a lot. If this sticks around on the board and there is a lot of boon cards, a decent healthy amount, so it could end up biting back later, even after you've already dealt 5 to them. But you'd also be gaining 5, to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a bad card. I just think you're kind of speculating on how much value you get from it, similarly to the Tortoise. It's like when you play the Tortoise, you're speculating on how much value my deck is actually going to get from getting these additional lands, and, if I'm going to get an animate land, which this is what this is kind of doing. If you have the white creature that's 1 in a white for a 2/2, ETB gives someone +2/+2, and adventure 1 in a black to give everyone -1/-1, then, this is an above average card. And there's a couple other cards that can kind of do that for you. You got the Expel, the Interlopers. I think that works with this. You've got a couple other cards like that. And it's just one of those things where you're speculating on how much value this is giving you. But in general, I just think this is an average playable. It's if it's free for you, you can take it. But if you're taking it pick 1, pick 2, you're really just speculating and taking a chance on how much this is actually going to help you more than hurt you.
Yeah, well, see, I'd be comparing this card to Scream Puff, right? The 5 mana, 4/5 Death Touch. Death Touch is really relevant. Like, there's a lot of games, especially with Elusive Otter, where like sometimes like they'll be like 7/7, 8/8, with those roll tokens. So I do think the Death Touch keyword is really relevant, and I do like you get the value at the end of your turn. So you're at least you are guaranteed to lose 2 life and get that card, rather than like it having to deal combat damage like Scream Puff before it gets removed to your opponent's turn cycle.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. I just personally would prefer to have a Scream Puff in my deck, being that 5 toughness is so much better than 4, because if I play this and my opponent uses a cut in, like that's just so punishing. And, that's really easy to get to. There's also other implications, such as like if the other guy is playing fairies and he has the fairy fencing and he has a fairy on board, he's only paying 1. If he has a stone splitter bolt, he only has to pay 2 in bargain. Like, there's a lot of implications with the 4 toughness stat line, where if I'm paying 5 mana, my opponent can just get a positive exchange of value. So that's why I say, like, it's an average card, and, it might be better in your deck, but in general, I just don't think it's, like, a premium card. Oh, wow, okay. Yeah, so I guess there's only 2 black cards. So we've got our first red card here. Accident Prone Apprentice, 1 in a red for a 1/1 creature. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, perpetually get +1/+1, and this also triggers if this is an exile. In addition to that, we have an adventure side for 1 in a blue instant. Until end of turn, target creature loses all abilities and becomes a 1/1 blue frog. I mean, generally speaking, if you're in the red-blue spells deck, I think this is just a strong card. I mean, you could just have the 1/1 frog side and it'd be a decent trick. And, the adventure side, the non-adventure side just pays you back the value from having that trick. So it's a card I'm happy to see. It's kind of in the lines of that Frolicking Familiar, kind of goes along the lines of the other Otter card. And, it's definitely something you want to have in that archetype.
Yeah, it just seems like Wizards is just saying like, hey, if this has the creature type Otter, and like you need to be playing this in blue-red spells. Yeah, great card overall. Yeah, don't have to tell you. The card's pretty bananas for the uncommon slot.
Yeah, and it's probably a card you'll be able to get pretty late because, Frolicking Familiar is a card that I'm willing to play in, a lot of my blue decks where I don't even have to have, like, dedicated red mana. But for me, this card, because it's, like, synergized around playing non-creature spells, I don't see myself playing this very often in a non-red-blue deck. So if you are in red-blue, I think you'll be able to get this pretty decently late. I'm going to try to speed this up here because we're going kind of late, and these cards are taking a lot longer than I originally thought. We've got Arrow to the Dragonfly here, 1 in a red for a 2/2 with Fire Breathing, 1 red to give him +1/0 until end of turn, and 2 in a red to reveal this card in your hand, perpetually becoming a dragon, getting +3/+3 and flying. I mean, I think this is just a strong 2-drop. We've seen how powerful 2-drops are in this format, and this is a modular 2-drop that, doesn't lose value as the game goes on. So overall, pretty strong card. I'd be happy to include in any red deck.
Yeah, no, this is just a well-designed alchemy card. Love everything about it. It's on flavor. It kind of just hits the nail on the head on every aspect.
And I could see you potentially using this in a standard alchemy deck with the likes of Godric and the Dragon Support. Definitely some potential there.
Overcooked.
Overcooked, in my opinion, the best alchemy card in this set. I think this card is literally one of the most broken bombs in this set, up the likes there with, all of the virtues. I would put this in that category. So we've got 2 in a red for an enchantment. Players can gain life, not really relevant. Celebration, at the beginning of your end step, create a food. If 2 or more non-land permanents enter the battlefield, then instead conjure a card named Food Fight onto the battlefield. I mean, this card is strictly just insane. If your opponent can't do anything about it, you're just getting infinite foods for the rest of the game, and when you no longer need it and you want to gain life, you just bargain it away. And if you have a food fight and you have 10 foods and your opponent can't end the game, you automatically win. So this card literally just puts your opponent on a clock starting on turn 3, and if they don't have an enchantment removal, they basically just lose if they can't kill you.
And I'm actually going to disagree with you. You said the players can't gain life isn't relevant. That's actually extremely relevant when you're in that red gruel aggro strategy, because that means they can't use their foods to gain life while you're slowly pinging them down. So if it's like a control deck, you're just like throwing them on that clock, like and they just can't stall, they can't glutton. Like it does actually shut off a lot of stuff your opponent could do.
That's very fair. I kind of meant in the sense that I don't think it really like determines the value of this card. I think if that text wasn't on there, the card would still just be absurdly busted.
True. Yeah, it's just even better with.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. But yeah, it is just kind of another upside. And, I've actually seen this guy, Sam Black, who has been drafting some Food Fight decks recently. And Food Fight is actually kind of a good card if you have like 10 plus food synergies.
Yeah, and there's also like Ginger Brute and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, definitely enough targets.
For sure. Now we've got Victory of the Pyro Hammer, 3 and double red for another saga. First chapter, deal 4 damage to each creature and planeswalker, and damage isn't removed from creatures during the cleanup steps, which is very relevant because in chapter 2, you deal 1 damage to each creature and each planeswalker, as well as chapter 3. So essentially just a really premium board wipe. You're going to be able to clear things for 3 turns, since the damage isn't removed from cleanup. That just means that if it has more than 4 health, it's going to die multiple turns later, or as well if you have other spells to combo with. And if they put out anything else on the following turns, it can't have 1 toughness, which is super relevant in this format. I think this card's super oppressive. Any red deck you're going to be playing, this card is an instant bomb, instant first pick.
Yeah. Besides, obviously, aggro. I mean, this card is just really premium. And this, honestly, the format's really fast. So people are not going to, and there's a lot of times like a board wipe is just going to ruin your day. So introducing a board wipe like this in a draft is really scary.
For sure. And we've seen the power of other board wipes in this set, and they're honestly mostly just game winning. Now we've got Dragonic Debut. The reason why I said that the 2-mana Dragon card has a potential in Standard, 1 and a X and a red to deal X damage to any target, and the next Dragon creature spell you cast costs X less to cast. So essentially, if you were in Standard, you can just play Godric for free if you have this spell, and I think this card is decent. I would probably value it lower than like a Stone Splitter Bolt, but I'd be happy to pick this card up, maybe pick 5, pick 6. If you have a couple of Dragon synergies, it probably increases from there. But, I mean, overall, removal is removal even if you're taxed.
Yeah, Sorcery Speed 2. And I will say it doesn't make Object free because it only reduces colorless. So it'll still cost the red, unfortunately, on that. But yeah, Sorcery, Fireball type deal. Just, pretty on rate. And with that potential upside, especially with like... what's the dragon that has exquisite taste?
Decadent Dragon.
Yeah. A super crazy combo if you get those 2 together.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. That's fucking broken.
And Archive Dragon.
True. All dragons are OP. Good card. Even better if you have multiple dragons. Now we've got our first green card here. Hex.
Good as the boys.
Good boy. Good card. Hex Kellen's Companion. 1 and a green for a 1/1 haste. Whenever you cast an adventure spell, if this is on the battlefield or exile, perpetually get +1/+1. Then if it's on the battlefield, you exile it with a counter. Whenever you cast a spell from exile, if it is in exile, you get to put it onto the battlefield if it had that counter. So a 1/1 haste that just appreciates in value as the game goes on and gives you huge incentives for having adventure, which is one of the most common mechanics. So overall, I would say this is, a B+ card. I mean, I think it's good in any like aggressive deck. If you're playing green-red, it's probably the best home.
Yeah, and it having haste is just like, especially because it's it's going in and out of the battlefield constantly, coming back and forth. So haste just like just keeps getting bigger and hitting you for more and more. Definitely a big fan of this card. There's so many adventures that you can be playing in green, like Worm and whatnot. So really big fan.
Yeah, especially if you have like a Ferocious Werefox, which is the adventure one that lets you combat trick to create a monster roll. You can just kind of save this anytime you want. So overall, like a really, really good card. And next, we've got Golden Opportunity, a very interesting card, one that I don't think has the most potential viability, but a fun one nonetheless. So 2 and a green for another saga. First chapter, conjure a card named Gilded Goose onto the battlefield, the classic good boy. Chapter 2, you may tap an untapped bird and sacrifice an artifact. If you do, create a card named Golden Egg on the battlefield, and as well do the same for Chapter 3. Honestly, I just think this card's too slow. I didn't really see anyone ever play the Golden Egg in any deck whenever the first Eldraine was out, and I don't see anyone playing this anytime soon. I just think that the value there is too late, because a lot of the value you got from Gilded Goose was by playing it on turn 1. You know, once you're on 3 mana, realistically, this is not as good as any other, other ramp card like a Fawn or something like that.
Yeah, I will say though, what I do like about this card is color fixing that draws 2. This is a 3 mana draw 2. If you are sacrificing a artifact that Gilded Goose creates, and then as well as maybe a Candy Trail or something of the like. And then so the Golden Egg, so you're at least you're at least going to draw 1 and filter 1 mana or gain 3 life. It is pretty slow, so I can see just sideboarding this out completely, but against the more mid range and grind slogfest matchups, I think this is a pretty decent card, but not. I might take a Torch the Tower over this.
Okay, well, you would take Torch the Tower over anything. Stop saying that. Torch the Tower's broken.
That's true.
Okay, this card, I mean, it's extremely medium. What really holds me back from giving this an above-average playable rating is the fact you can't sacrifice an enchantment, because most of the cards I want to be bargaining, like my Hopeless Vigil, my Hopeless Nightmare, are the ones that allow me to scry, and you can only sacrifice an artifact, so kind of has niche scenarios with what your deck is trying to do to be an above average card, but I mean, I think it's a decent inclusion if you have a high top end.
Yeah, if you have a lot of food synergies, this is also really good.
Next, we got Swine Rebellion, 2 and a green sorcery. If you control 3 or more boards with different names, conjure each card from the 3-pig spellbook. If you control 2 or fewer with different names, conjure 2 of your choice from the spellbook into your hand, put 1 onto the battlefield. So essentially every time you're going to put the second little pig onto the battlefield, and then you're going to add whichever one you want of your choice, just because second little pig has 1 more toughness. I mean, in general, you're paying 3 mana to create a 2/3 to potentially become a 4/4, and as well adding a second card to your hand. So just a good exchange of value. I'll say that the first effect is pretty much irrelevant unless you're just a high roller and you have multiple copies of this. Then, I mean, that's kind of broken. Let's be real.
In Standard, that's something you could do. I mean, I'd be interested to see, a 3 little piggy tribal, but yeah, by itself, 3 mana draw 2, except you get a pick. Yeah, it's the green divination.
But it's better than a draw 2 because you get to put 1 immediately on the battlefield.
Yeah, true.
I mean, this is a solid card that you're willing to put into pretty much any green deck. Next, a card I'm not too sure about, Steady Tortoise. 4 and a green for a creature with 3/3 ward 2. Whenever you attack, this perpetually gets +1/+1, and this also triggers if the tortoise is in exile, and he doesn't have to be the one that attacks. It can be anyone, so that's very nice. With an adventure side of 1 red sorcery, create a 1/1 rabbit. It gains haste until the end of the turn. I mean, honestly, just the design of this card, the fact that it has the tortoise and the rabbit writing on top is amazing. I think this is a really medium card. In the decks that this is going to be good in, it's going to be pretty good, but in the decks where you're not trying to go with this kind of theme, it's an easy cut from the deck, I think it's really strong in red-green, but I just don't see the high potential for splashing this in, other archetypes.
Yeah, it is kind of just the way it's designed. It is just pigeonholing itself in that, green, red-green X color, mid-range. I do kind of like it in maybe a 4-color deck. Obviously you have to, hit the right amount of fixing for that, but I kind of see it as you could, in those decks, it's going to see this card as 1 red, create a Bargain Father, and then 5 mana 3/3 with a plus side.
That's fair. I mean, if you need the bargain, it is a decent incentive, but in general, my opinion is that if you're playing a 4-color, 5-color deck, typically you're trying to play the late game, you're trying to play control, so you're probably not going to get in as many early attacks as you would like to make this become the on par stat line of being like a 5/5, because if you're splashing, you're not going to be able to be as aggressive. But when it works, it works. And, this is another great reason to be in red green, which, I recently had success with. So overall, I really like this card.
Yeah, I'm a fan of it overall, and standard wise, I don't know how to evaluate it yet, but I like it.
Moving on to the gold cards here, we've got High Fae Prankster, 2, 1 blue, 1 black for a 1/4 flying Death Touch Fairy. ETB, choose one, perpetually exchange target creature's base power with another target creature's base power, and the other option is to perpetually change this to a 4 attack, 1 toughness stat line, which is the exact opposite of what this card is. This card is just honestly very versatile, and if you're in this archetype, it's an amazing inclusion. The Death Touch is amazing. If nothing else is on the board that you can gain value from, it just guarantees that this always has, some portion of value. If it had Flash, the card would be busted, so I understand why they didn't do that, but I do dislike when they don't give fairies Flash, because fairies need Flash.
Yeah, Flash and fairies out here, and I will say, like, I don't know if like Ben Brode's son snuck into the design team or what, because it is just like the Hearthstone card that would swap the swap the power. So I do like that, and also it becoming a 4/1, flying 4/1, like especially when your opponent's low, like that's not an ability you're going to be using a lot, but that's the kind of ability that's going to be winning you games.
100%. I mean, overall, just an amazing card in this archetype. But, once again, this is not the archetype that blue needs help in, because this is the highest color pairing win rate among any combination that you can have currently with blue by a long shot. So, I mean, it just makes the most playable blue archetype even better. And generally speaking, I think you'd be completely fine taking this as a first pick.
Yeah, I would definitely first pick this.
Now we've got Outfitted Jouster, 2 a red and a black for a 2/2 ETB, conjure a card named Steelclaw Lance and a card called Brawler's Plate and attach them to the Jouster. If damage would be dealt while it's equipped, prevent that damage. When damage is prevented this way, sacrifice an equipment attached to Jouster. So essentially, you're getting a 6/6 immediately, and then if he takes damage, you have to sacrifice one of these equipments, and both of the equipments give him +2/+2, and the plate actually gives him trample. So 6/6 trample to start off for 4. So overall, just an amazing stat line. I don't know if it's better to say that the removal of the plates by taking damage is better or worse for the card, but that aside, the card is just overall strong, so I don't think that really dictates the value of it.
Yeah, and then equip Knight with the Steelclaw Lance. That's not going to be, you can't really like control that, but that is like a random upside that can help. And then besides that, like the flavor of this card too, like big fan of it. The equipment, getting destroyed instead of the character. But I definitely think like you're always stacking Brawler's Plate, and then there's maybe a world where you like switch equipment, or maybe even add equipment to Jouster, and you just go for like this Voltron kill.
Yeah, you could have a bespoke battle garb. That's like a really possible thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, I mean, a really strong card in pretty much any aggressive deck, and a card that you might be okay with splashing, like if you're playing white. Moving on, we have, I think this is... Okay, yeah, so moving on, we have our Boros gold card. Boros didn't need any help, by the way, Wizards. 1 a red and a white for a 3/3, so already on stat line. ETB, conjure 7 cards named 7 dwarves on the top of your library. They perpetually gain when this ETBs, draw a card, then shuffle. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. And the 7 dwarves are a 2 mana 2/2, which gets +1/+1 for each other dwarf you control. I mean, this card is just strictly just broken. I mean, I don't know what else to say. This just gives you an infinite value engine. It gives you advantage on the top end. It gives you advantage late. Like, this card is just another reason to play Boros, and there was already so many reasons to do that. This is just a power creep version of the Signpost gold card for this archetype.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, at least white's getting more love. The half glass full. And yeah, I also want to say if you can pull this and a dedicated doll maker, hey, that's 14 dwarves in your deck right there. But yeah, the fact that you draw a card when you play the dwarf, so you have an immediate draw, like, whew, this card is push. So you could go 2 drop, 2 drop, turn 4.
Yeah, definitely something that you're willing to first pick. Definitely something that you're willing to splash if you're touching either red or white, which is very uncommon for a low-costed card that you want to splash in pretty much anything.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got Sir Joshua and Sir Saxon, green and a white for a 2/3 double team. If you control exactly 2 permanents with this same name, the legend rule does not apply, and each other card you control with the same name has Battle Cry, and Battle Cry is whenever a creature attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+0 to the end of the turn. So essentially, you're getting a 2/3 for 2, which is already pretty strong in this meta in a game of 2/2s. And then you're also adding another 2/3 with the additional upside that whenever they attack, they boost each other. I mean, overall, just a really strong card and a great reason to be in green-white.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then if you like, attacking with both, like +2 to your whole entire board, that's like, if you draw this late game, it's not, it's or a bunch of rats. Like if you have a bunch of rats, this card kind of goes crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it just fills all parts of the quadrant, so overall, just an amazing card. And now we've got 3 more cards here. So we've got our Simic Gold card, Grow Old Together, 1 and a green and a blue. Instant, seek 2 creatures among the top 10 of your library, shuffle creature cards in your hand, perpetually get +1/+1. Another example of just a Hearthstone ripoff. I mean, this card is good. The problem is, it's in the color pair that you would least likely like to play out of any other color pair in the game. Like at this point, I would rather play blue-white than green-blue. And that's really saying a lot. Like the only time I've ever had success with green-blue was when I had 3 up the beanstalks, which is just a statistical anomaly.
Yeah, I definitely think this is for standard. This will definitely be a lot cooler. Yeah, throwback to the mean streets of Gadgetzan. But I'm a fan of the card for standard, and then draft. It's like if I have a prophetic prism in my green deck, it's just like that. I'm down to splash this.
That's fair. That's very fair. Moving on to our last golden creature here, Drover of the Swine. 2 and a white, black, and green for a 5/5. ETB, choose one, conjure a card of your choice from the 3-pig spellbook onto the battlefield, or return up to 3 boar creature cards with different names from graveyard onto the battlefield. I mean, this is strictly just a standard card. I don't know what the implications of this card are in standard. This card probably becomes more valuable if there's like other good cards in standard that have the boar type, which I don't know what any of those are, but I mean, it's a card that gives you another rectangle, right? So, I mean, that has to be, like, good if you can do it.
I mean, yeah, and I definitely say, like, yeah, to play this in draft, you're already going to have to be in that green, multicolor deck, which that's, definitely not a guarantee because that's just asking for a lot of premium cards to come your way. So it is really hard to play this 3-color card, but, I mean, there are worlds where you can do it. And then you're just high rolling if you get this on the board.
For sure. I mean, cards that make more cards are always like good if you can play them, but generally speaking, we haven't seen any card with 3 different pips see play in this set at all, so I'm skeptical on it, but, someone could obviously prove me wrong if they just get past all the little pigs. The biggest issue I have with this card is that you're only getting 1 card in each pack that's Alchemy, so in order to have incentives in your deck for this card, that is just so unlikely, even if people don't value those cards that highly, just because the chance of that many specific pig-oriented alchemy cards being in the pack is just so low that realistically, it's just a 5/5 that's making you a 2/2.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And our last card here, which is the card that Wizards really wanted to talk about, the Captivating Crossroads, which is, it's just equivalent to an Edgewall End, maybe even better. During the first 3 turns of the game, it enters the battlefield tapped if you're the starting player, and if not, it comes into play untapped, and you have to choose a color, and then you add any 1 mana to that color. I mean, it's strictly just an auto-include and pretty much, and it's an auto-include in every deck. You're not passing this all day. Unless you have like a Torch to the Tower, you're not passing this.
Yeah, it has to be something really premium. Just that kind of color fiction fixing. Especially like it's only the first 3 turns, so like if you do end up drawing it later, especially or like you play it as your fourth land for turn, you just have choose the color and have a land of that type. Like, yeah, pretty premium.
I mean, 100%, any kind of land that's going to add you any mana of any color in a set that really incentivizes splashing is going to perform very high. And I see this being one of the highest win rate alchemy cards out of this bunch. But that was our last card. Do you have any final thoughts? Anything that really stood out to you from these alchemy cards?
Yeah, just overall, like we were saying on some of the other cards, the quality of the design of these alchemy cards has definitely been going up. Like, so I am excited to be drafting more alchemy. Just do one here and there on Magic Arena. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me, though.
So for me, my biggest thing is, I personally would realistically only like to play traditional. So like I was telling you before, there needs to be a large incentive to make me play best of one. And alchemy is currently only best of one. I don't know if it's in the plan to make it traditional. If it became traditional and that was like the only option, I would still play traditional. But in general, there is one thing I like about these cards and one thing I dislike. Number one, there is not very much RNG that goes into these cards. There's nothing that, in my opinion, really creates like a snowball effect except for that one Boros card, which is just absurdly like a win button. And, in general, that does not de-incentivize me from playing this format. But on the opposite side of the spectrum, I don't really think that these cards are enough to incentivize me to play best of one, nor do I think that these cards have that big of an impact on choosing what archetype you want to go down when selecting what deck you're going to play in a draft, right? Like, I don't think there's like a lot going on here that really just changes things up in the tier list, right? Like, all of the blue cards that we got, which blue, is the lowest play rate color out of any other color in the set. All of those good blue cards are all blue-black. And blue-black was already the best combination for you to play blue, so it doesn't really change anything on the bottom end. And then we've got cards like the 3/3 Boros card, which was already the second highest win rate deck in the entire set. So it's kind of just like they're giving us cards in areas which we didn't really need them to be, which isn't necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. But what I will say is I don't think it changes the set enough for it to feel like an entirely new experience, which is something that I was kind of looking for.
Yeah, for me, my personal fix, I don't know like the exact ratios or anything, of course, but there should be that guaranteed alchemy card, and then like the rest of the alchemy cards should just be like thrown into the set, and so like you have a chance to get multiple alchemy cards. Just have a more chances to like make the three little pig deck.
I completely agree. That's one of the biggest things where it's like, for me at this point, I think the main reason why I would play Alchemy is so that I can just farm other people who don't understand how to assess certain Alchemy cards early on. But other than that, I'm not sure how much, I enjoy these cards yet. Obviously neither of us have played them, but if you guys want to see some Alchemy drafts on the channel, make sure to let us know down below in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to smash the like button, turn post notifications on, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another banger. And as always, if it's not the goo, it's got to go. Peace.
Is that indigo?